morning, Good Life family, and welcome to today's online service. We're so thankful to have you here, and we're thankful to be continuing to study our series called I Am. And why we're so excited about this series as a church family is we're looking to Jesus and seeing who did he claim to be. And in the scriptures, he has some I am statements, and we're going to continue with that today. Anytime we gather as a church family, our hope is that you would clearly see Jesus and that together we would share in the good news of the gospel. In addition, we also want to be a people that share life together as well. I'm going to give you a couple ways that you can share life through our online service this morning. The first way is simply by being a person who's committed to tuning in. If you're part of the Good Life family and you're traveling today or you're staying at home but you're still tuned in, I want to say thank you so much for being committed to sharing life with us here as a church family. If you are new or it's your first time checking us out or whatever that might be, I would encourage you, if you have any questions about our church family or if you want to know more about following Jesus, simply email us at info@goodlifefl.com, or you can visit our website, goodlifefl.com. Other great ways to share life with us as a church family are you can find us on social media, Facebook as well as Instagram, and right here in this room where I'm standing, we meet every Sunday at 9:30 as well as 11. But whether it's this online service or whether it's right here, our hope is that we would be united together as being a people that share in the good news of Jesus in our lives as well. So that's where we're headed today. We're thankful to have you. Let's go ahead and kick off service with worship.
Darkness, we were waiting without hope, without light, till from heaven you came running. There was mercy in your eyes to fulfill the law and prophets. To a virgin came the word, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. To reveal the kingdom coming and to reconcile the lost, to redeem the whole creation. You did not despise the cross, for even in your suffering you saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. Morning that you rose, all of heaven held its breath, till that stone was moved for good, for the Lamb had conquered death. And the dead rose from their tombs, and the angels stood in awe, for the souls of all who'd come to the Father are restored. And the church of Christ was born, and the Spirit lit the flame. Now this gospel truth of old shall not kneel, shall not fade. By his blood and in his name, in his freedom I am free. For the love of Jesus Christ, who has resurrected me.
If you've ever been put in charge of the kids, you know you've got to have your head on a swivel. Whether you're the single parent that's at home with the kids, whether you're the older sibling that has to watch your younger sibling, whether you're the grandparents of the kids, or if you're a babysitter, if you've ever been responsible for a child or let alone a group of children, you know you have to have your head on a swivel because the world is a dangerous place. But we also know that kids don't have to find danger in order to put themselves in harm's way. They have this innate gift to create danger, right? And when you're in charge of the kids, you've got to make sure that they stay safe and you've got to protect them from not only the danger in this world, but the danger that they bring into this world. And when those moments happen, you've got to be ready to dive in and save that kid in moments just like this. Check out the screen. Isn't that great? I mean, how many of y'all have been in those moments when you were centimeters away from a trip to the emergency room, but God enabled you to be able to grab that child before that happened? You know, we think that those moments are limited to little ones. Of course, we grow out of that tendency to put ourselves in dangerous situations. We grow out of that tendency to put ourselves in situations where we could bring harm and danger on ourselves. But here's what I've come to realize in my life and in looking at the lives of others. We don't grow out of that. We just get better at hiding it when it happens. We get better at hiding the fact that we have tendencies inside of us that not only do we live in a dangerous world, but we live in such a way where sometimes we invite the danger, where sometimes we invite the harm. And that tendency in us, we have to recognize that when we do that our adult-sized dilemmas that we put ourselves in, they usually end up with something far worse than a few stitches or some scrapes on the knees. It ends up being life-altering decisions, life-altering consequences. It ends up putting us in situations where it causes ripples that not only go through our lives for years to come, but go through the lives of those we love. And that tendency in our heart to put ourselves in danger is why we need somebody in our life to rescue us from those situations, both from this sin-filled, broken world, from our sin-filled, broken hearts, but also from our tendency to do the wrong things that put us in danger. We're in the midst of a series called I Am, walking through the I Am statements of Jesus in the Gospel of John. And what we're trying to do is put before us who Jesus says he is in his own words. Let him speak for himself and declare who he is in no uncertain terms, but not leave knowing more about what Jesus said. Not just that, but leave knowing what it looks like to have our lives align with that reality. to hear what Jesus says in his own words, that he is the I am, but he gives us very clear practical implications of what that means so that we can walk out the door of this building today and step into life in a way that we will be safer because we know who he is and we have aligned our lives with who he is as well. As we dive into today's passage, we're actually picking up after a story we talked about on Tuesday in our 128 moment that we email out to everybody. It's the story of a man who had been born blind, who was sitting by the side of the road, and Jesus walked up to him and healed him in a miraculous way. Really, really powerful story in John chapter 9. And this man who had been born blind becomes miraculously healed. He can see, and the people around him start to find out what had happened in his life. And you would think this is amazing news, right? That you would go home and go, hey, there was this guy who couldn't see, and now he could. Man, that's awesome news. And it was for everybody except for the Jewish religious leaders, because they found out what had happened, and they found out when it had happened, and it caused a huge controversy because Jesus had healed this man on the Sabbath. And these Jewish religious leaders, who should have been excited that this man who had been blind his entire life was now able to see, they weren't excited about it because Jesus had broken one of their rules. He had challenged their authority. And in this moment, this man had been brought before the religious leaders. They had essentially sort of put him on trial. He'd had his best day ever, and yet they put him on trial for what had happened because they wanted to get him to denounce Jesus because he was messing up their authority, he was messing up their privilege, he was challenging and confronting their hypocrisy, and they wanted to be done with this man. So they tried to get this guy who had been born blind, they wanted him to go, yeah, Jesus is a fraud, he's of the devil, I don't know what happened, but maybe I could always see and I didn't know it. When the man would not submit to their story, when he would not submit to their narrative, these Jewish religious leaders who are looking at a man that morning was begging by the side of the road and had been blind since birth, and now he stands before them, able to see. They looked at him and he said, we are kicking you out of the synagogue. We are shunning you from our community, our Jewish community. You will not be able to do anything with anybody that wants to stay in the synagogue. You have been shunned. And so on the tails of that moment, of this guy being cast out because he will not denounce Jesus, and in response to sort of the leadership of God's people, how these people who were supposed to shepherd God's people, who were supposed to intercede for them between God and man, hopefully interact with them, lead them to worship God and obey God, they had taken this guy who did not submit to their narrative and they'd kicked him out. So in response to that, Jesus says what he's about to say today. He walks into two I am statements, and he walks through those. And he's not just speaking to the religious leaders. He's not just speaking to the man who had been born blind. He's probably speaking to an assembled crowd of Jewish people near the temple. And in this crowd would have been the religious leaders, would have been probably this man who had been born blind, and would have been a lot of other people. And in this moment, he speaks to them, and he communicates two I am statements that I think can hit your life and my life today, where we can walk out into this dangerous world a whole lot safer, because we understand who Jesus is. Will you join me in John chapter 10, verse 1, as we dive back into the Gospel of John? Verse 1 says this, truly, truly, I say to you, this is Jesus talking, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs in another way, that man is a thief and a robber. And he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes before them, and the sheep, they follow him, and they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, and they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. Now, I don't know, maybe some of you guys grew up on a sheep farm, but a lot of us didn't. I know none of us grew up in first century Palestine, so there's some things here that may be a little bit foreign to us. When Jesus talks about a sheepfold, this would have been a pen, an enclosure that would be near the town where a shepherd who had spent a long time out in the wilderness, probably more than a day, would have spent several days out in the wilderness, but was coming back to town to rest, stock up on supplies. The sheepfold was a place where he could bring his flock, put them in a safe place where a hired person would be the gatekeeper. A hired person would watch the sheep while the shepherd was able to rest. And so this hired hand, this gatekeeper, would be in charge of the sheep. But when the shepherd came back, he'd go to the sheepfold and he'd call a sheep out. But here's the thing. Several shepherds would more than likely use on any given night the same sheepfold. So you have this flock and this flock and this flock, but they're all intermingled together inside of the sheepfold. So how did they separate them out? Did they have to stand there going, well, I have all the red tags and you have all the blue tags? They weren't pin in ears at that point. What they would do is the shepherd would walk up and he would literally call them out and they'd follow his voice out of the sheepfold. So if you're going up to the gate and you're calling the sheep out and you're using your voice to invite them back to you, you're the shepherd. But Jesus is saying, if you're not coming in by the door, and if the sheep don't know your voice, you're not the shepherd. And so Jesus is saying that there may be people who are trying to interact with the sheep who have no right to do so, who are not doing it in the best interest of the sheep. Remember, Jesus is not just talking to the crowd. He's not just talking to the man who had been born blind. He's talking to the religious leaders, and he's calling them out. What he's in essence doing is saying, the people who aren't coming by the door, the people who the sheep aren't listening to the voice, they're thieves and they're robbers, and their intent is to harm the sheep. He's talking to the religious leaders to contrast them with himself. Those religious leaders were willing to cast a guy aside because he didn't suit their narrative. This man had been born blind. We've got to recognize what that meant in this culture. As Jesus and his disciples passed by this guy at the beginning of John chapter 9, as they're walking past him, the disciples are actually debating, Jesus, who sinned that this man was born blind? Did the man sin or did his parents? Which sounds like a crazy conversation, but it would have been a typical theological debate that people would have had in the first century because they assumed that God gave good things to good people and God gave bad things to people who did bad things. And so they assumed if you have a child who's been born blind, somebody must have sinned to do it. That's an improper assumption because Jesus said, no, nobody sinned for this man to be born blind. He was born blind so that the glory of God could be revealed in him. So here's the consequence of that assumption in that society. This man from birth, and probably his family, had been at least on the outside looking in. They had been, at least to a little degree, maybe a large degree, they had been outcast from the community because they assumed you're a bad person, so God allowed bad things into your life. For his entire life, he and his family have experienced this. And on this day where God revealed his glory in a miraculous way, healing him and giving him back his sight, the religious leaders do not celebrate it. They shun him again. They shun him even further. They take him from what had been bad that morning to even worse by nightfall. And Jesus is saying, these are the sheep you're supposed to be caring about. You must be a robber because you're coming to harm them. But notice what it says in here, that when Jesus comes to the sheepfold, when the shepherd comes to the sheepfold, he doesn't just call them out with his voice. Notice what else it says. Verse 3, he calls his own sheep by name. What is Jesus saying here? I want you to hear this morning. On a planet of almost 8 billion people, in a world that is chaotic and busy and noisy and broken and dark, in the midst of all the things that we would rather not hear on the news and rather not experience our lives, I want you to hear this truth, that Jesus knows your name. Jesus knows your name. No matter what it feels like today, no matter what you've walked through this week, no matter what storms you're walking into next week, I want us to start with this truth, that Jesus knows your name. And I do not want that to be sort of a focus and a celebration of who we are. I want it to be a declaration of who he is, that his bigness does not negate his closeness, that he is big enough to hold the universe in the palm of his hand, and he is close enough to catch our tears in a bottle, and he is close enough to know our name. He is intimate enough to know our name. The religious leaders, they didn't know this guy's name. I bet throughout the course of the trial, his name never comes up in John chapter 9. At no point do they even bother to learn his name because they're not about protecting him. They're about leveraging him to get what they want. So did the religious leaders get it? Did Jesus in verses 1-5, did he convince them? And they're going to have this wonderful, eye-opening moment, and all these religious leaders are going to go, you're the Messiah. No, we know how the story goes, right? So look at verse 6. Verse 6 says, the figure of speech that Jesus used with them, they didn't understand it. So Jesus again, he said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. So Jesus tried using this sheepfold analogy, and they're just sort of looking at him with blank stares. So he goes, let me try another tack. And he goes into this other analogy where he starts to say that he is the door of the sheep. And everyone who came before the door was a thief or a robber. But the sheep didn't listen to him. So he tries this new analogy, focusing on the door. Now, most of us, other than petting zoos, we probably never interacted with sheep, right? Maybe in a petting zoo. Maybe if you have been around them, you probably haven't seen an ancient sheepfold. But in this moment, like the people who are hearing this story would have completely understood what it was. So let me try and drag it into our culture so we can understand what Jesus is saying. We don't have a sheepfold, and we don't have a door on our sheepfold. And if you do, can I please come see your sheepfold, right? But we do have doors on our houses, don't we? We have a front door to our house. And through that door, we invite family and friends and guests to come in and to spend time with us. But we also lock our front door to keep fiends out, to keep people who have ill will toward us out. We have a door that provides a filter to who gets in to our family and who does not. We have a door that can be locked and secured to protect us from harm. But we also open that door to welcome the people that we're supposed to welcome, right? So we have this door analogy that we certainly understand. The religious leaders were supposed to have been a door to protect God's people from harm. They were supposed to have been a hedge of protection for the people that God had chosen to reveal himself to the world through. And yet they had become the thieves and robbers who were inflicting harm on God's people. Now, thousands of years have passed since this moment, but there are still robbers and thieves who are seeking to kill and destroy people like you and me. There are still robbers and thieves who are seeking to get into not only your house, not only your family, not only our church, but into your heart to bring harm to you, to bring destruction to you. But they don't always show up and say, "Hi, I'm a robber, I'm going to harm you." That's not how they usually identify themselves. If they do, and you let them in, that's on you, right? But in this, I want us to see that there are other things that are coming. We don't have to live 2,000 years ago to understand that we need a door. We need someone to protect us. We need someone to protect us from false teachers. We have more access to more teaching and preaching than any time in human history, and that brings some positive things, and that brings some negative things. It used to be that you usually heard from only a few voices in regards to God's word. But now you can turn on your television, you can pick up your phone, you can grab your computer, and you can listen to anyone at any time about anything. But I will tell you, just because they say Jesus and they use Bible verses does not mean that they are protecting your heart and that they are guarding you toward truth. I will tell you that if you're watching it on television, the chances are, I'd give better than 75% chance that that's maybe not a voice you should be speaking to. That's not a voice you should be listening to. I'm not saying there aren't any good ones, because there are, and far be it from me to say that there aren't any. But I do know enough to know that there are several voices on the television that I would never want you, as a member of this church or as a guest in this church, to ever be listening to. There are false teachers out there. There are some who are just outright false, completely deceiving people. There are others who are just speaking weak doctrine. They're watering down Scripture. They're apologizing for who God is. They're trying to be his PR firm. They're trying to do things and tell you just enough to get you in and maybe give to their church or give to their cause, but not enough to confront the sin in your life. There's a lot of weak doctrine out there. But that's not the only thing that I think could be the thief and robber that's coming into your life, your heart, your family, or our church. We also got to recognize, guys, that modern culture is speaking like crazy. And we hear more from culture than we ever have in any time in human history. It used to be that there'd be somebody, like maybe you'd be in the room with that person. You'd watch something, you'd have a sporting event, you'd be watching something about politics, you'd see something unfolding on the news, and you'd be in the room with that person that just says something completely ridiculous, right? But you had to be in the room to hear them. Well, now everybody has this microphone that reaches the entire world, and they tweet it out, and everybody's got to see it. Like, there is just nonsense that is bouncing around our world all the time. And most of it is completely contrary to being a sheep in Jesus' flock. We've got to recognize that modern culture is out there. But let me go even further and risk offending some along the way. I think we need to add in government, and I think we need to add in celebrity, and I think we need to add in Hollywood. I think we need to add in any of these voices that we might be listening to in order to define what happens in our heart, to control what happens in our heart and in our mind. Why do I say government? I'm not saying it because That's not a right-left thing. That's not a blue-red thing. That's not an RD thing. What I'm telling you is that sometimes we have a tendency to let our peace be determined by what happens in Washington or what happens in elections. And I'm telling you, there is no biblical basis for that. We have got to surrender our hearts to the door of the sheep, the one to protect us. Let me go even further. We can have a tendency in our human hearts as adults. Remember, little kids fall down and it's very apparent that they're in danger. But as adults, we're better at hiding it. We're better at keeping it in the shadows. We can be allowing our hearts to be shepherded by our career, by our possessions, by our relationships. How many times have you or somebody that you know or love has found themselves in a romantic relationship and everything was good in their life as long as everything was good in the relationship? And then that relationship crumbled and so did their life at the same time. I'm not telling you we shouldn't be wounded when our hearts are wounded. We should be. God has given us tender hearts and we need those. But what I'm saying is that if you have built your life on the foundation of somebody else's love for you other than God's, you are on shaky ground. How many times have we watched somebody whose life is fine until their career goes wrong and everything starts to fall apart? Our career is important, yes. Should our work be an act of worship? Yes. But if we are building our lives and defining our worth and establishing our reality and measuring our hope by what happens in our careers, we are on shaky ground. If anything over the last 18 months or so has taught us anything, if we have put our hope in anything other than the solid rock of Jesus, we are on shaky ground. Good life. Who is your shepherd? Who holds the key to your heart and to your mind? Who do you allow to speak into who you are and what you're supposed to do? Who controls the dials of your hope and your peace? I don't think we even realize how much we allow the world to be our shepherd. And when we do, we're just asking for danger and destruction and heartache. We listen to those voices far more than we listen to Jesus's. If you were to put a pie chart of your free time and how much of that time is spent with God and how much of that time is spent on social media or digesting another episode of SportsCenter or anything like that, right? No matter what it is, are we letting the voice of God shepherd us through this broken world? Or are we spending as little time with Jesus as possible? And then we're shocked when we find ourselves in danger, when we're the ones who are bouncing ourselves off of sharp objects and walking away wounded. Because here's what we have to realize. When we don't spend time listening to the Good Shepherd, walking with him, when we don't say, Jesus, you are the voice that I'm going to listen to, when we find ourselves in danger and we stumble and we fall and we look around for the world to be the one to catch us, get comfy because they're not coming. They're not coming. Jesus says he's the door of the sheep to protect them. And in order for us to fully understand this passage, guys, here's what we got to grasp. In order for us to fully understand this passage, we've got to understand we're sheep. We're sheep. Now, wouldn't it be great if you came to church and I go, guys, we're lions, right? And you want to be a lion. Guys, you're tigers, right? No, we're sheep. Like, that's not God's brightest creature. It's not God's bravest creature. They have a relatively sweet disposition, but they're a little dull. They have absolutely no natural defense and plenty of natural predators. Okay, like for God to tell us, hey, you're sheep, you don't go, thanks, man, that's so encouraging, right? But guys, we got to grasp, if we're going to understand this passage and understand our desperate need for God to keep us safe, for us to make sure he's the voice that's shepherding us, and we've got to grasp that we are sheep. Sheep's greatest ability is their proclivity to wander into danger. And you know what? Isn't that us? If there's anything we do naturally well, that's universal, is that we naturally put ourselves in bad situations, right? We desperately, desperately need a shepherd because we are deep down sheep. From a biblical perspective, we have to understand that what Jesus is saying about sheep is not new. Jesus is building on truth that is throughout Scripture. Let me just point out two cases. In Isaiah 53, the prophet writes, all we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way. It doesn't say like some of you are. Like we know some people who are like that's really a sheep. Like that person, they're a sheep. Like maybe I'm a golden retriever, right? But they're a sheep. No, the prophet is clear here. We're all sheep. We all have a tendency to put ourselves in harm's way, and not just scrapes and stitches. I'm talking eternal danger. We've gone our own way. Jeremiah 50, verse 6 says, my people have been lost sheep. And catch this, their shepherds have led them astray. They have forgotten their fold. Guys, this is us, and this is why Jesus came. And if we don't grasp that, we won't understand why Jesus needs to be the door. Look at verse 9. Jesus says again, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved. He will go in and he will go out and he'll find pasture. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus says that he's the true door. And through him and only through him can we be saved. But Jesus is saying more than that we need him for something more than just salvation. He's our only means of salvation, and that is our most profound need. And without him, we have no hope. But we don't just, it isn't just like we need Jesus to be saved, and then Jesus, thanks, I got it, I'll see you in heaven one day. No, we need him every single moment of every single day. Jesus is saying, I'm not just the door to protect the sheep from other voices. I'm the door through which my people, my sheep, my flock can go and find what they need to be sustained, where they can go in and they can go out from me and they can find good pasture to sustain them through this life until I see them one day in heaven. But we got to recognize Jesus is not the only one trying to lead sheep. Jesus puts before his audience and puts before us that you really have two options in life. You're going to listen to the wrong shepherds who are going to steal, kill, and destroy, or you're going to follow Jesus and he's going to lead you to abundant life. Now, I hear that and I go, like, why is this a head scratcher for us, right? On my left, we have steal, kill, and destroy. On my right, we have abundant life. Which one do we choose? If anybody's going to my left, okay, we need to have you checked up, right? I mean, everybody go, I'd like abundant life, please. Can I have an order of abundant life, please, right? What we got to recognize is that when the ones who steal, kill, and destroy, when they show up, they don't go, hi, I'm here to steal, kill, and destroy. And when Jesus talks about abundant life, it may not mean what we think it means. See, the wrong shepherds, they're not who they seem. And the abundant life on my right that Jesus is describing is not on our terms, it's on his. And in those two things, it makes it a far more tempting decision one way or the other. You see, the wrong shepherds, they don't show up selling hardship and despair and destruction, but that's exactly what you'll get if you listen to their voice. The wrong shepherds advertise a feast, and yet it's only bait for a trap. But we assume that following Jesus on this side, that if we were to follow Jesus, if we were to go into this abundant life, that if we're sheep, he's going to lead us to this meadow, this field, lush and green, belly deep in alfalfa. We're going to eat. We're never even going to have to move. We're going to get to this field. We are going to plop ourselves down, and we're not even going to have to walk anywhere. We're just going to lean over and eat. That's what life's going to look like if we're following Jesus. And I'll ask you who have been following Jesus for a long time, is that what your life looks like? Has Jesus ever led you to a place where you never had to move again, where you could lay there and never have to put any effort out there and just kind of go, man, that was a hard day, right? That's not what following Jesus looks like. So these people don't come telling the truth, and we've deceived ourselves into defining abundant life on our terms and not on Christ's terms. So what are these green pastures that the shepherd will lead his flock to? We got to understand what Jesus is promising. Well, in this region, put a picture on the screen here. This is what green pastures look like. If you're colorblind, that's not your colorblindness that's doing this, okay? It is a very, very brown screen, but if you are a first century hearer of Jesus' teaching here, you would know this is what a green pasture looks like. Let me lean into it a little bit further. This looks utterly barren to us. It looks devoid of vegetation. But a shepherd of this flock knows that right there in that plot of land is exactly what his flock needs for them to get what they need for that day. You see, only a small amount of rain comes to this region. The best farmland in that area was not reserved for the sheep. The sheep had to go other places. The best farmland was used for growing crops. So the big, lush, the beautiful fields, that's where they grew stuff. The sheep, they put out into the wilderness. But this would have been a green pasture for them. Only a small amount of rain comes, but they also get moisture that blows in off the Mediterranean in the evening breeze. And as it blows in, it condenses along the edges of the rocks that are exposed to that breeze. So as that breeze is coming in, it would hit those rocks, water would collect, and come down, and you'd end up getting little sprigs of grass like this. Just little bitty tufts of grass, and there'd be a bunch of them all along this hillside that had been exposed to the evening breeze carrying that water vapor in. And the shepherd knows that a pasture like this one is going to provide just enough food for his flock for that day. Just enough to sustain them for that moment. Jesus is promising the same thing here for you and for me. We think abundant life in Jesus is plopping down in the midst of more than we could ever want in terms of our definition of what we want, where we'll never have to move, we'll never have to suffer, we'll never have any hardship, we'll get whatever we want, but that's not what Jesus is promising. Through him, the door of the sheep, we will find the pasture that we need, but not necessarily the pasture that we want. His promise to us to give us what we need when we find out that it's not the green, lush field, but it's a barren place sometimes with just enough. Sometimes in those moments we can start to worry. We can look around and go, well, I have enough for today, but what about tomorrow? And what about the next day? And what about that problem that hasn't been resolved? And what about that diagnosis that I'm not sure is going to be treated? And what about that loved one who doesn't know Jesus, right? We have a lot of things that are over the next hill that can, in that day, bring us a lot of problems. But one rabbi puts it this way: worry is dealing with tomorrow's problems on today's pasture. Jesus is going to lead you through himself, through the door, to the pasture that you need. Don't worry about 10 minutes from now. Don't worry about 10 hours from now or 10 days from now. Trust that the shepherd will get you where you need to be to get through that as well. Now, it's really easy for me to say that from the stage, and I'll confess it's really hard for me to do that in life. That's because I'm a sheep, and I need a shepherd to every day lead me where I need to go. And I've got to constantly, when worry rises up, I've got to go, he's only giving me what I need to know. He's only giving me what I need to sustain right now. And I've got to trust that he's got the rest. But even when that landscape of life is dry, when it's barren, I want you to hear today, I want me to hear today, that we can trust him. Look at verse 11. Verse 11, Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. He who is the hired hand and not the shepherd, who does not own the sheep. He sees the wolf coming and he leaves the sheep and flees. The wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own and my own know me, just as my Father knows me and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Jesus says very clearly, I am. Here's our second I am statement. He says, I am the good shepherd. But none of those other voices are going to show up and go, hi, I'm an awful shepherd. You ought to follow me. All of them would say they're good shepherds, but can they all be trusted? I think my life has proven, and I'm pretty sure yours has as well. There's been people who have spoken into your life, who have called you into this or that, where you trusted them and you found out that they were not a good shepherd. The true character of every shepherd will always end up being revealed. So what does the shepherd do? And you'll know it by what does the shepherd do when the sheep are in danger? Those Jewish religious leaders were only worried about themselves. They're only worried about their power. They couldn't care less about the people that they were called to lead. They were only worried about themselves. And when trouble arose, they focused on themselves, not the people. But Jesus, the good shepherd, was willing to lay down his life for his sheep. If there's ever a moment in your life or mine where we look around and the pasture is really dry, there's not been rain in a long time, and you're looking at it, you're like, we've eaten everything that's here. I don't know what's coming tomorrow. In those moments, I want us to remember, this doesn't look like the green pastures God promised. I want us to remember that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus is talking to the Jewish people, but he's also confronting the Jewish religious leaders. So he's speaking to this Jewish audience, this entirely Jewish audience. And maybe some of you have Jewish heritage, probably many, if not most of us do not. I do not. So what about the rest of us? Is Jesus just talking? Is this message just for the Jews? Look at verse 16. He says, and I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock and one shepherd. Before Jesus ascended to heaven, he would invite his followers into the Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations, to go and reach every corner of the globe with the good news of the gospel, that people from every tribe and nation and tongue would come to understand who Jesus is. But here we see hints of it right here in this illustration, this declaration of him being the good shepherd. He goes, "You're my Jewish flock. God sent me to you first as God's chosen people, but I've got other sheep and other flocks, and they're going to hear my voice." As a Gentile, from a biblical perspective, I'm a Gentile because I am not of Jewish heritage. I'm not a son of Abraham. I'm so glad that God has a heart for the nations, because 2,000 years, an ocean and several continents away, the good news made it to me. And I was not of the Jewish flock, but I heard his voice, and he called me to salvation. And many of you, if not most of you here today, heard the same thing. I love that God has a heart for the nations, but how can we, who are of this other flock, who are from the distant places, how can we look at a world that doesn't know Jesus and go, man, I'm glad I heard? The Great Commission is an invitation for all of us to go tell the nations about the good news. But I love how Jesus puts it. He says, when they hear my voice, they will come. They know his voice. Remember all those sheep in the sheepfold, and they separated them out by the shepherd's voice? Well, you could walk up to any field, and 10 of us could walk up to any field that's packed with sheep, and we could say exactly what the shepherd says. We could try and mimic the way that he says it, but those sheep would not react to us. They would not raise their heads to us. They would not move for us. But the moment that the shepherd raises his voice and he calls out into the field, those sheep raise up and they run to him. And it's not just because he's the one holding the food. It's because they know that he is their shepherd. And when God calls your name, when God's voice speaks into your heart and he calls you to himself, you will know his voice and he will rescue you from danger. For us to catch this, we got to understand that people don't become his sheep because they follow him. They follow him because they're his sheep. It isn't as if Jesus walks up to the field and all the sheep get to decide whether he's going to be their shepherd. They know his voice already, and he calls his sheep to himself. Jesus doesn't call anyone because they've earned it, and neither can we. I want us to catch this, that Jesus knows everything about you, and he still calls your name. Jesus knows everything about you, and he still calls your name. The world wants us to perform for acceptance. The world wants us to meet a standard in order to be embraced, in order to be loved, in order to be accepted. We are sinners, dead in our trespasses until Jesus calls us from death to life. And he knows everything we've ever done and everything we ever will do, and he still looks at people like you and people like me, and he says, I am your shepherd, come home. And to this day, the Good Shepherd is still calling people from every tribe and nation and tongue. The Good Shepherd is still seeking to save the lost. And Jesus, the same voice said, will not a shepherd who has 100 sheep, if he has 99 who are found, will he not leave the 99? Will he not put them in the fold and go out into the wilderness to find the one to rescue it, to bring it home? Will he not do that? And when he finds that one, will he not rejoice with all joy that he can muster? Will he not celebrate the fact that the one that was lost has now been found? And will he not celebrate more in the one that was found than in the 99 who weren't lost at that point? Jesus looks at his followers in Matthew chapter 18 and he says, that's how heaven reacts when one of the lost sheep is found. When one of the lost sheep hears the voice of God and they come home. So guys, there's reasons for hope in this passage. If you're following Jesus today, but there's people you know and people that you love who aren't, I want you to hear the hope that Jesus is still the good shepherd and he's still going to seek and save the lost. And he invites us to be a part of that process. Don't give up in your life on praying for that one lost sheep. Don't give up in sharing the good news with that one lost sheep. That person that you prayed for a long time, and they have hurt you so many times, they have rejected you, they have rejected the truth so many times, that you just want to wash your hands of it and be done. I will tell you, heaven rejoices when one lost sheep is found. I'd so much rather be a part of that process and never see any fruit than to look back and go, oh, if I had. But maybe Maybe if you're following Jesus, I hope that's encouragement to you today. But if you're not following Jesus, maybe you've listened to a lot of bad voices, and they've led you into danger, and they have hurt you. You've entrusted your heart to romantic relationships, and it's only ended in pain. You've entrusted your heart to career, and everything's great until the pink slip comes through. You've entrusted your heart to your finances, and everything's awesome until there's a global pandemic. You've entrusted your heart to how things are going in the world, and the news just beats you down all the time. You've entrusted your heart to a lot of things, and it's only led to heartache and to pain and to sorrow. And when life hurt the most, you've looked around and all those bad shepherds, they were nowhere to be found. I want you to hear Jesus calling your name and calling you to come to him and that he can be trusted. I want you to hear that he says he's good, but that his goodness is not measured by our circumstances. His goodness is not measured by what the pasture around us looks like. His goodness is measured by the cross. Look at verse 17. It says, "For this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I have received from my Father." If you ever wonder whether Jesus is good, I encourage you, look to the cross. Don't watch the news for it. Don't look at your life for it. Don't listen to doctors for it. Don't look at your stock portfolio for it. I want you to look to the cross and define the goodness of God and his love for you by the fact that he sent his son to die in your place. This passage that Jesus is talking about is really the exclamation point on what Isaiah the prophet said. We already looked at it a little bit, but look back there. In verse 6, we saw that we are all sheep that have gone astray, but look at what verse 5 says. It says, he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All that is said before verse 6 where it says, all we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned every one to his own way. The Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. When we were in eternal danger, Jesus is the one who dove in to rescue us. But this is not a story that's just about sacrifice. It ends so much more than just the sacrificial portion of the story. John Piper reminds us of this. Check this out. It says, the story doesn't end with a mangled shepherd lying dead among 3 dead wolves with sheep scattered and thirsting and starving in the desert. That isn't what he's communicating. Our story is not just a story of sacrifice. It is a story of victory. The same good shepherd who died on the cross took his life back up again at the empty tomb. He ascended back to heaven. He rules and reigns on high, and he sits at the right hand of the Father, interceding for us. Our story is a story of sacrifice, but it is a story that ends in victory because the good shepherd rules and reigns over all, and he is big, and he is good, and he is close, and he is loving, and he calls us by name. Guys, that is good news that demands a response for us to surrender our lives to him, surrender our eternity to him, to give him the only keys to our heart and our mind, the only person who controls the dials of our hopes and of our dreams, that he gets our all. And to give him any less just does not make any sense. If he is who he says he is, and we are who he says we are, how can we do anything less than make our lives all about him and share that good news with the world? But when we do, we shouldn't be shocked at how people will respond. We'll end with verse 19. It says, there again, there was division among the Jews because of these words. Many of them said, he has a demon and he's insane. Why listen to him? Others said, these are not the words of one who is oppressed by a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? Jesus has always and will always elicit different reactions. Always. People can see the exact same evidence and reach very different conclusions. And we are living in a time where the loudest voices in our world, quite honestly, the ones who seem to control the access to even sharing your voice at times, they want nothing to do with Jesus. I leave you with 2 challenges. Don't let the world's opinion of Jesus shape how you respond to the Good Shepherd. There was a time when I was a kid where everybody I basically knew was a Christian, where people went to church, where church was accepted, where figuratively and often literally the church was at the center of the town, the steeple was the tallest structure, and long before you ever hit the town limits, you could see the cross at the top. We don't live in that world anymore. That only means we need to be more bold in sharing the good news, and it only means we need to be more dependent as sheep who need a shepherd. Don't let the world's opinion of Jesus shape how you respond to the Good Shepherd. And if you're lost, I want you to hear that he died so you can be found. Last thing is this. Don't let the world's reaction to Jesus keep you from sharing the good news about the Good Shepherd. We hold the greatest news that the world has ever heard. We have been entrusted to love enough to share the good news as we share our lives as well. We've been entrusted with that. The world is going to react in negative ways now more than ever, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Don't let the world's reaction stop you from sharing the best news the world has ever heard. Let's pray.
Well, hey, Good Life family, one last time, I want to say thank you so much for joining us for online service today. And I quickly do want to remind you, if there's anything God's stirring in your heart, or if you have any questions about our message today or our service or knowing more about our church family, I would encourage you to email us at info@goodlifefl.com. We would love to come alongside you and serve you and help point you to Jesus together as a family. You can also visit our website, goodlifefl.com, for any more information about our church family. You can also find us and connect through social media. We're on Facebook as well as Instagram. And we'll be right here in this room, 9:30 and 11 o'clock on Sundays, as well as online service at 11 o'clock on Sundays. So that's what we're looking forward to next Sunday. We'll be continuing our series called I Am. And until then, we hope that you have an awesome week. Love you guys, and we will see you right back here next Sunday, 9:30 and 11 in person, and 11 o'clock online. See you again soon.